She built her empire stitch by stitch, and they burned it down in a single night. But what Damien Cross didn't know, what no one in that gilded ballroom knew, was that Serafina Vale wasn't just a fashion designer. She was the daughter of the most dangerous man in America. And the moment he signed those divorce papers, he didn't just lose a wife, he declared war on the Moretti bloodline. If this story already has its hooks in you, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this thing travels. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. The ballroom at the Hargrove Grand smelled like money, old money, the kind that had been laundered so many times it had lost any trace of where it started. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across 500 faces, all of them immaculate, all of them performing. The charity event was called Light for Tomorrow, which was the kind of name people chose when they wanted to feel virtuous without actually sacrificing anything. Tables draped in ivory silk, centerpieces of white orchids that cost more per stem than most people earned in a day. A string quartet playing Vivaldi in the corner, ignored by everyone. Serafina Vale stood near the far end of the reception floor in a midnight blue gown she had designed herself. A design that had taken her 11 days and 4 discarded drafts to get right. The neckline was clean, the silhouette architectural, the kind of dress that didn't announce itself but made every other dress in the room feel like it was trying too hard. She held a glass of sparkling water because she hadn't touched alcohol in 9 weeks, and she wasn't about to start tonight. Her feet hurt. Her lower back had been sending quiet warnings since 6 o'clock. She was 16 weeks pregnant, and only 3 people on Earth knew it: her obstetrician, her assistant Maya, and her husband. She watched Damien from across the room. He was easy to find. He always was. Damien Cross moved through a crowd the way a lit match moves through dry grass. Everything near him leaned in, and the smart ones stepped back. 41 years old, broad-shouldered, a jaw that looked carved rather than grown, wearing a charcoal suit that had been cut specifically for his body. He was laughing at something the man beside him had said, and the laugh was the one Serafina had stopped believing in about 14 months ago. Warm on the surface. Nothing underneath. Vivian Hart was beside him. Serafina had known about Vivian for 7 months. She hadn't confronted Damien. She had done what she always did when something threatened to destroy her. She absorbed the information, kept functioning, and decided she would deal with it when she could deal with it from a position of strength. That had been her strategy since she was 19 years old, and her mother died in a hospital bed in Lausanne with no insurance and $3,000 in debt. Serafina had paid it off by selling every piece of furniture in their apartment and working double shifts at a dressmaker's shop for 4 months. She knew how to wait. She knew how to hold. But 16 weeks of holding a secret that was also a heartbeat changes the math. Vivian was wearing red. Of course she was. She was 28, 10 years younger than Serafina, with the kind of beauty that didn't require effort. The genetic lottery kind, the kind that made effort look embarrassing by comparison. She had her hand on Damien's arm, not his sleeve, his arm, and she wasn't hiding it. They were in a room full of cameras and donors and journalists with press credentials clipped to their lapels, and Vivian Hart had her hand on Serafina's husband's arm. The man who had recently replaced Serafina's obstetrician without telling her approached from the left. Dr. Henley, Damien's personal physician, the one who had called 2 weeks ago with some administrative question about her prenatal records. She thought it strange at the time. She thought about it again now. Mrs. Cross, a voice at her elbow, her husband's lawyer, Gerald Voss, dry and precise as a legal brief. Mr. Cross has requested a moment with you, in the Meridian Room, now, if possible. Not if you're available, not at your convenience, now, if possible, which was the polite version of now. Serafina set her water glass on the nearest tray. Lead the way. The Meridian Room was off the main corridor, a private event space the hotel kept reserved for negotiations that didn't need witnesses. It had a long conference table, 8 chairs, and wall sconces that gave off amber light. When Serafina walked in, there were already 6 people arranged around the table. Gerald Voss, 2 associates she recognized from Damien's legal team, a man she didn't know with a briefcase on his lap, and Damien himself standing at the head of the table with his jacket still on. Vivian was also there, seated. Serafina stopped just inside the door. She took in the room the way you take in a car crash. Fast assessment, catalog damage, locate exits. She was aware of her heartbeat. She was aware of the child inside her, the size of an avocado by now, the book said, floating in a darkness that didn't know anything about rooms like this. "Close the door," Damien said. She closed it herself because she wasn't going to give anyone else the satisfaction. "Serafina." Damien's voice was even. He'd always been good at that. The controlled register, the measured tone that made other people feel like they were the emotional ones by comparison. "I think you know why we're here." "Tell me anyway." He glanced at Voss. A document slid across the table toward her. She didn't touch it immediately. She looked at it. 20, 30 pages, the top sheet printed with language she recognized, the structured formality of a legal dissolution. Petition for divorce. Damien R. Cross, petitioner. Serafina M. Vailcross, respondent. "I want a divorce," Damien said. "I've had these prepared for some time. I'm asking you to sign tonight." "Tonight," she repeated. "There's no reason to delay something that's already over." She looked at Vivian then, directly. Vivian looked back without flinching, and Serafina gave her credit for that. It was harder than it looked, being the woman on the other side of that kind of stare. "And you brought an audience for this." "Vivienne is here because she's part of my future. I thought it was better not to pretend otherwise." "How considerate." "Serafina." "I'm pregnant, Damien." She said it flat, without decoration, without any of the softness she had imagined using when she finally said it aloud to him. She had imagined that conversation for weeks. This was not that conversation. 16 weeks. "Your child." The room went still. Not quiet. Still. Different thing. Damien's expression didn't break the way she expected. There was no flash of guilt, no involuntary softening. What crossed his face was something she had to study for a moment before she identified it. Calculation. He was already 3 moves ahead. He had already known, or he had already decided it didn't matter. "That's being looked into," Voss said carefully. Serafina turned to the lawyer. "I'm sorry?" "Paternity," Voss said. "Given the circumstances, Mr. Cross has questions about—" "Get out of my face." The words came out quiet and precise. Not loud. She didn't need loud. "You are a lawyer. You're not a man worth addressing directly on this topic, so I'm telling you to stop talking." Voss stopped. She looked back at Damien. "You have questions about paternity." "I have attorneys who do." "And what do your attorneys think happens when I walk back into that ballroom and tell 500 people, including the 3 journalists from Meridian Financial Review who are out there right now, that you arranged a private meeting to question the legitimacy of your own child?" "I'd be careful," Damien said. You've been living on a salary from Cross Industries for 4 years. Your atelier, your studio lease, your design team, every one of those has a financing thread that runs back to my holding company. Careful, Serafina." There it was, the threat with a silk shirt on. She picked up the divorce document. She read through the top 3 pages standing. She registered the asset allocation. The prenuptial terms applied cleanly, which meant she retained her pre-marriage intellectual property, but nothing acquired jointly, which Damien's lawyers had spent 4 years categorizing very carefully. She registered the terms around the pregnancy. Contested paternity claim pending, child support deferred pending resolution. She looked at the pen Voss was extending toward her. She took it. And she signed. Every page that required a signature, she signed it. No hesitation, no theater. She set the pen down when she was done and aligned the document stack neatly and slid it back across the table to Gerald Voss. "I'll have my attorney contact you Monday morning," she said. "If you attempt to interfere with my prenatal care, my medical records, or my access to any of my pre-existing design intellectual property, I will make sure that every creative brief, every email correspondence, and every verbal instruction Damien has given me over the past 4 years goes to the 3 journalists outside this door before midnight." She looked at Vivian one last time. "The red is the wrong shade for your undertone. You want something closer to vermilion. What you're wearing makes you look like you're trying to compete with someone. You should dress like you've already won." She walked out. She kept walking. Through the corridor, back into the ballroom, past the string quartet who had moved to something by Debussy, past the orchid centerpieces, past the immaculate faces with their champagne glasses and their performance of virtue. She made it to the main exit before she felt it, the catch in her breath, the tightening behind her sternum that wasn't grief yet, but was adjacent to it. She pushed through the glass doors and into the night air, which hit her face cold and clarifying. She stood on the granite steps of the Hargrove Grand for exactly 8 seconds before she heard movement behind her. Damien had followed her, or someone had, or Mrs. Cross. She turned. It was not Damien. It was not anyone she recognized. The man was in his late 50s, compact and weathered, wearing a dark suit and an earpiece. He was standing at the top of the steps with his hands at his sides, and behind him were 2 more men, one at the bottom of the steps to her left, one at the street level to her right. And beyond them, on the avenue, 3 black vehicles had pulled up with an efficiency that didn't look accidental. "My name is Caruso," the man said. "I work for a man who would like to speak with you. He's been waiting for tonight." Serafina looked at the vehicles. She looked at the men. Her hand moved, without conscious instruction, to her abdomen. That instinctive gesture that every pregnant woman knows, the body's first territorial act. "Who is he?" she asked. "He'll tell you himself." Caruso's voice was respectful but completely immovable. "He's been waiting a very long time, Ms. Vale. He says that's your name, your real name. He says you should have had it from the beginning." The cold air moved across her face. Her feet still hurt. Her lower back was still sending warnings. Inside her, the heartbeat she had heard on a monitor 2 weeks ago, 152 beats per minute, clear and insistent, continued without any knowledge of charity galas or divorce documents or men in black suits who appeared from nowhere with cars she hadn't called. "I'll listen to whatever he has to say," Serafina said, "but I'm getting in the vehicle on my terms." Caruso almost smiled. "He said you'd say something like that." The center vehicle's door opened from inside. She could see a figure in the back seat. Old, still, the kind of stillness that isn't passivity, but its opposite. A man who had learned decades ago that he didn't need to move to make the world rearrange itself around him. She walked down the steps. She got in. The door closed behind her and the convoy moved immediately, smooth and silent, and the Hargrove Grand disappeared through the tinted glass. The man in the back seat was perhaps 70, perhaps older. His face was a map of everything that happens when you make hard decisions for 50 years. Not softened by it, not broken by it, but marked. He had dark eyes and white hair and hands that lay on his thighs with a kind of deliberate composure. He was looking at her the way people look at something they've been waiting for. Not with hunger, but with something quieter and more serious than hunger. "You have your mother's eyes," he said. His voice was accented. Italian, faint, the kind that time and immersion had worn smooth but not erased. "I've been watching photographs for 32 years. The photographs didn't prepare me." Serafina looked at him. Her pulse was doing something complicated. "Who are you?" "My name is Alessandro Moretti." A pause. The kind that comes before something that cannot be unsaid. "I am your father, Serafina. And we have a very great deal to discuss." The convoy moved north through the city. The lights outside were indifferent. Somewhere behind them, 500 people in a gilded ballroom were still performing their charity, still lifting their glasses, still pretending they couldn't smell the smoke. Serafina Vale had signed her divorce papers, lost her financial foundation, been publicly questioned about the legitimacy of her child, and been told by a stranger in a moving vehicle that her entire life was constructed on a hidden architecture she hadn't known existed. She'd had worse nights. She had survived every single one of them. She looked at Alessandro Moretti and said, "Then talk." He did. For the next 40 minutes, in the back of that armored vehicle moving through streets she thought she knew, the world Serafina had built brick by careful brick was taken apart and rebuilt around her in a shape she didn't recognize. Her mother, Elena Vale, the woman who had died in Lausanne with $3,000 in debt and no insurance, had not been an ordinary woman. She had been born Margherita Moretti, younger sister of Alessandro himself, taken in as a ward after her parents' deaths, and raised within the organization until the age of 24 when she fell in love with a man outside the family, took a different name, and disappeared with the intention of never returning. What she had taken with her, the only thing Alessandro had let her take without consequence, was her freedom, and the secret she was carrying, a pregnancy, 7 weeks along, the result of a relationship she refused to name to anyone. The relationship had been with a man named Carlo Esposito. Elena never told him she was pregnant. She vanished first. She vanished completely. She wanted you to have a life without this. Alessandro's voice carried no accusation when he said it. He had made peace with what he couldn't have changed. She succeeded for 32 years. What she could not account for was what would happen when she was gone, when there was no one left who knew the truth except me. You knew the whole time, Serafina said. I had you watched. Not intrusively, not interfered with. I kept distance because your mother asked me to, because she was right that you deserved a life you chose. But then you chose Damien Cross. Something shifted in his eyes. Not quite contempt, but close. And I watched a man spend 4 years systematically identifying everything you had built and positioning himself to take it. And then tonight he took it, she finished. He thinks he did. Alessandro reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced an envelope. He placed it on the seat between them without pushing it toward her, leaving the action to her. I am dying, Serafina. My cardiologist gives me between 60 and 90 days of functional health. After that, I deteriorate. What I have built over 50 years, the territories, the alliances, the financial networks, the people who depend on this family for their safety and their livelihood, it does not disappear because I stop breathing. It requires a successor. She looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. You have people, men who've been with you for decades. I have men who are loyal because they fear me, or because I pay them well, or because I made their careers and they owe me. Loyalty built on debt is not loyalty. It's a delayed betrayal. What I need is blood. What I need is someone who carries the name in their tissue, who can stand in front of every captain and every rival family and every financial partner we have on 3 continents and say, this is mine by right, and I will defend it. There is no one else, Serafina. Your mother made sure of that. She picked up the envelope. Inside, a single folded document, a legal instrument, dense with language that she read through twice before she understood the architecture of it. It was a succession framework, formal, witnessed, notarized. It specified that Alessandro Moretti's sole heir, subject to the completion of 3 succession trials required by Moretti family law, was his daughter Serafina. 3 trials, she said. The trials exist for a reason. They don't test strength. We have plenty of men who are physically strong and entirely useless. They test judgment. They test nerve. They test whether a person can hold a position when everything around them is designed to make them break. He looked at her steadily. From what I watched tonight, you already know how to do that. I'm pregnant. Yes. 16 weeks. I know. And you're asking me to enter an organized crime succession while I'm carrying a child and my soon-to-be ex-husband is already questioning paternity and preparing to strip every asset I have. I'm telling you, Alessandro said quietly, that the child you are carrying is the next blood heir of the Moretti family, which means that Damien Cross, the moment he filed those divorce papers and contested that child's legitimacy, started a war with a family he does not know exists. He does not yet understand the scale of what he has done. The old man's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I am giving you 30 days to learn what I have spent a lifetime building, to pass 3 trials, to take what is yours by blood. After that, you will be in a position to answer everything that happened in that ballroom tonight, not as a woman who lost, but as a woman who arrived. Serafina sat with that for a moment. She looked out the tinted window at the city moving past. She thought about her mother in that Lausanne hospital room. The thin hands, the labored breathing, the last conversation they'd had about debt and survival, and the stubbornness that Elena Vale had always called the only inheritance she had to give. The stubbornness and the eyes. You have your mother's eyes, the old man had said. She thought about the heartbeat on the monitor. 152 beats per minute. Something that hadn't asked to be born into any of this and was going to be born into it anyway. She folded the document, replaced it in the envelope, and held it. Tell me about the first trial, she said. Alessandro Moretti looked at his daughter. Really looked at her, the way he had been waiting 32 years to do. And for just a moment, the composure that had been his armor for 5 decades shifted, and something raw and irretrievable moved through his face like a light passing through a window. Then it was gone. Tomorrow, he said. Tonight, you rest. You eat. The child needs... Tonight, Serafina said. Tell me tonight. I don't have time to rest my way into power. She met his eyes without flinching. You said 30 days. My husband is already moving. His lawyers are already working. His physician has already been asking questions about my medical records, which means he's been planning this longer than tonight. Her voice was level and cold and exact. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it with full information from the first hour. So tell me about the trial. Alessandro Moretti was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he told her. And somewhere in the back of that armored car moving through the indifferent city, Serafina Vale, who had been born Serafina Moretti and not known it, who had spent 32 years building something from nothing while the inheritance she didn't know about waited in the dark, began the most dangerous education of her life. Outside, the lights of the city passed without comment. The Hargrove Grand was 12 blocks behind them. Damien Cross was in it somewhere, probably back at the table with Vivian, probably already on the phone with his lawyers. He was thorough. She had always known he was thorough. She had also always known, though she had never let herself say it aloud, that he had never once looked at her the way he looked at a deal he needed to close. She had mistaken his interest for love. She had been wrong about that. She had also been wrong about other things, about her mother's past, about her own origin, about the foundation she was standing on. But there was one thing she had not been wrong about in 32 years, not once, not even in the worst moments, and she wasn't wrong about it now. She was not going to lose. The convoy drove on, and in the morning, everything would begin. The safe house was in the garment district, which Alessandro had chosen with the specific dark humor of a man who appreciated irony. His daughter had spent a decade designing clothes 3 blocks from the building where she would learn to inherit a criminal empire. The building had been a textile warehouse in its previous life, and someone had kept the bones of that. Exposed brick, iron columns, the ghost of industrial machinery and the scarred concrete floors. The upper 2 floors had been converted into something that looked, on the surface, like a high-end architectural firm's workspace. Drafting tables, monitors, clean lines. The real operations were below ground. Serafina didn't sleep. She had been given a room on the 2nd floor. Clean, spare, a bed with good linens, and a window that looked out onto a lightless alley. She lay on top of the covers in the clothes she had worn to the Hargrove Grand because her things were at the penthouse on East 64th Street, which was Damien's penthouse, which she had just formally agreed to vacate. She lay there and listened to the building settle around her and did the accounting that needed doing. Assets she could access. 2 personal bank accounts totaling roughly $80,000, her own savings from before the marriage, kept separate on the advice of a financial advisor she'd hired at 26, who told her to always keep a door open. Her portfolio of pre-marriage design intellectual property, if Damien's lawyers hadn't already started building arguments to complicate that. Her reputation, which was still intact as of 11 hours ago. Assets she could not access. Everything else. The atelier on West 28th, the studio lease. The 6-person design team she'd built over 3 years, all of them on salaries that ran through Cross Industries' subsidiary payroll. Her press connections, most of whom had professional relationships with Damien's PR arm and would need careful handling if she was going to keep them. Liabilities. A pregnancy that her soon-to-be ex-husband was actively contesting. A divorce proceeding that his legal team had clearly been preparing for months. An unknown quantity named Dr. Henley, who had been asking questions about her medical records. And now, as of approximately midnight, a father she had never known, and a criminal inheritance she had 30 days to qualify for. She was on her feet before 6. Caruso was already in the operations floor when she came down the stairs, standing at a long table with a younger man she hadn't met yet, and 2 open laptops. He looked at her without surprise. She suspected he was the kind of man who was incapable of surprise, that it had been trained out of him over decades of working for Alessandro Moretti. "I need a phone," she said. "Not one Damien's team can access, and I need to speak with Alessandro before 8. Dawn is resting until before 8, Caruso." A pause. He reached into his jacket and produced a phone, sealed in a plastic sleeve. "Clean line. Dawn wakes at 7. I'll tell him." She took the phone. She called Maya first. Maya Osei had been Serafina's assistant for 3 years and was the closest thing to a co-conspirator she'd ever had in a professional context. 26 years old, ferociously organized, with a memory for logistical detail that bordered on unsettling. Maya picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd already heard something. "I saw the news alert," Maya said instead of hello. Her voice was careful, the way it got when she was processing something she hadn't fully landed on yet. "There's a piece on StyleWire. It's vague, but it mentions your name and Damien's and an announcement expected this week." "What happened?" "He filed for divorce last night, in a room full of his lawyers with Vivian Hart present." Serafina walked to the alley-facing window and kept her voice flat. "He's contesting the pregnancy." Silence. "Maya, I'm here. I just..." A breath. "That's, okay. Okay. What do you need?" "I need you to go to the atelier this morning before anyone else arrives and pull every original design file, physical copies, the archive binders, the sourcing notebooks going back to 2021. Put them somewhere he can't access. Your apartment, a storage unit, anywhere. Can you do that without triggering the building's keycard system?" "I have a physical key. I never switched to the card reader." A pause. "Smart woman. And the digital files. The master drive in the bottom left drawer of my desk. Take it." "Done. What about the team? Nadia's already texted me. She saw the StyleWire piece. Tell them nothing until I have something real to tell them. Tell them the office is closed for a private administrative matter and you'll update them by end of week. Tell them their paychecks are safe." She pressed her forehead briefly against the cool brick beside the window. "Tell them I said so personally." "Are they safe? Their paychecks?" "They will be." She said it with the certainty she didn't entirely have, because the alternative was to start the day in a position of weakness, and she refused. "I'll be in touch." She hung up and stood with the phone in her hand and breathed. Alessandro came downstairs at 7:10. He moved more slowly in the morning. She could see the cardiovascular reality of what he'd described, the slight labor in each step, the deliberate way he managed his pace. He was dressed with the same careful formality as the night before. Dark trousers, a collared shirt, jacket. A man who didn't do casual, probably hadn't in 50 years. He sat at the head of the operations table, and a woman Serafina hadn't met brought him espresso in a ceramic cup without being asked. "Sit," Alessandro said. "I prefer to stand for briefings." He looked at her across the table, something in the look that was half assessment, half something more complicated. "Sit. You are carrying my grandchild. You stood for 6 hours last night at a charity event after which you were also ambushed by armed men and had your understanding of your own life restructured. Sit down." She sat, because he wasn't wrong about the 6 hours. "The first trial begins in 72 hours, Alessandro said. He wrapped both hands around the espresso cup but didn't drink. "It is not a test of violence. I want to be clear about this because I know what you're imagining. Rooms full of men with weapons, a demand that you prove something physical. That is not what the Moretti trials require. They require something more difficult." He turned to the younger man at the laptops. Early 30s, dark-haired, watchful, with the kind of face that didn't give anything away unless it decided to. "This is Luca Ferrante. He has been with this family for 9 years and has managed our Eastern financial network for the last 4. He will be your primary point of contact through the trial period." Luca Ferrante looked at Serafina with an expression that she couldn't immediately categorize. Not hostile, not welcoming, something in between that she recognized as the specific wariness of a man who had been told his future would be decided partly by someone he didn't yet respect. "The first trial," Alessandro continued, "is called the Ledger. You will be presented with a financial crisis, one that is real, not manufactured. There is a port facility in Baltimore that processes a significant portion of our import network. 3 weeks ago, we discovered an internal diversion scheme. Someone within our own management structure has been siphoning routing fees across multiple shell accounts. The amount diverted over 14 months is approximately $11 million. The person responsible has not been identified." He set down his cup. Your task is to find them, verify the evidence to a standard that holds in our internal council, and present a recommendation for resolution, not execution, not violence, resolution. This is a ledger problem. Solve it like one. Serafina absorbed this. What resources do I have access to? Luca, the financial records, 2 analysts. Limited query access to our external accounting firm, though they don't know the nature of what they're serving. Alessandro paused. And your own mind. 72 hours to find an $11 million internal theft that your people haven't been able to crack in 3 weeks. 22 days, Alessandro corrected. My people have been working it for 22 days. They have identified the mechanism, but not the actor. You have 72 hours to go further than they have. She looked at Luca. You've been on this? Since it surfaced. His voice was even, uninflected. A man who had learned that information was more valuable when dispensed carefully. Then you brief me. Now. She pulled one of the laptops toward her. And I want the full records. Duh. Not a summary. The actual transaction logs. Luca looked at Alessandro. A half second. Enough for her to notice and for her to file away the fact that he'd done it. Alessandro gave the smallest nod. Fine, Luca said, and sat down across from her. The morning passed in numbers, which was, it turned out, familiar territory. Serafina had spent 4 years managing her own business's finances before Damien's CFO had folded the atelier's accounts into the cross-industry subsidiary structure, and she had always insisted on reading the raw numbers rather than summaries. Spreadsheets didn't flatter. Spreadsheets were the most honest conversation available to her. By noon, she had the shape of it. The diversion ran through 3 subsidiary accounts, all connected to a legitimate port management company called Heiress LLC. The fees were extracted at the routing level, small enough per transaction to avoid automated flags, frequent enough to accumulate. Whoever had built this knew the system intimately, not an outsider, not a new hire. Someone who had been inside the Moretti financial architecture long enough to understand its specific tolerances. 14 months, she said. Who joined the Baltimore operation more than 14 months ago and less than 2 years ago? Luca had the answer ready. 3 people at the management level. Erickson, finance, Macias, operations, and DiPietro, who supervises the routing desk. Pull DiPietro's transaction access logs. We've reviewed. Pull them again. I want to see the timestamps. He pulled them. She saw it in 40 minutes. Not the transactions themselves, which were clean, but the pattern of when DiPietro's access credentials were used versus when DiPietro was physically logged into the facility. There were 19 instances over 14 months where routing desk access was initiated during time windows when DiPietro was documented as off-site or on leave. Someone's using his credentials, she said, or he's running it remotely and deliberately leaving a trail that looks like credential theft. Which means either DiPietro is the actor or DiPietro is being set up, Luca said, which means we need the physical access logs for the building. Every person who badged into the routing floor during those 19 windows. She paused. Can you get those? Yes. Do it. Her phone buzzed at 1:47 p.m. Unknown number, but she picked it up because the only people who had this number were Maya and whatever operative Caruso had it routed through. It wasn't Maya. Mrs. Cross. Gerald Voss, Damien's lawyer. His voice was precisely calibrated. The tone of a man delivering a message he'd been paid to deliver without his own inflection contaminating it. We wanted to inform you, as a professional courtesy, that Cross Industries' legal team has filed a motion to compel disclosure of financial records relating to your design consultancy, specifically regarding any unregistered intellectual property developed during the period of your marriage. Mr. Cross's position is that designs produced while you were operating under the Cross Industries subsidiary umbrella may be subject to joint asset. Gerald, she kept her voice even. I know what you're doing. You're building a case to claim my work. You know that won't succeed, and I know that's not the point. The point is to occupy my time and my legal resources while Damien moves on other fronts. So I'm going to ask you one direct question, and I want you to actually answer it. A pause. Is there a motion being filed regarding the child? A beat. 1 second too long. A petition for paternity testing has been filed with the court this morning, yes. In the interests of... She disconnected. She sat with that for 3 seconds. The petition for paternity testing, filed this morning, which meant it had been drafted before last night, before Damien even told her he wanted a divorce. He'd had this ready. He'd been building this architecture of legal pressure for months, waiting for the right moment, and the gala had been the moment he chose, because it was public and it was controlled, and it put her at maximum emotional disadvantage. She stood up from the table and walked to the far end of the room, to the industrial window overlooking the alley, and breathed through it, methodically, in and out. Luca Ferrante watched her from the table without saying anything. She gave him credit for that. When she came back, she said, "Where are we on the physical access logs?" "Coming through now." She sat down and they went back to work. By 3 o'clock, she had a name. The physical access log showed that a man named Roy Tessin, a logistics consultant listed as an external contractor for Harbridge LLC, had badged into the routing floor during 16 of the 19 flagged windows. The remaining 3 windows corresponded to dates when the building's visitor log showed a different name, a different contractor, but the same company affiliation. "Who approved Tessin's contractor access?" she asked. Luca was quiet for a moment. She felt it before he answered, the slight shift in posture, the way the air changed around someone who was about to deliver information they didn't want to be the one to deliver. "The approval signature is Di Pietro's," he said. "But Di Pietro has been with this family for 11 years. I didn't ask for his biography. I asked about the signature." She looked at the screen. "Is it his actual signature or a digital authorization code?" "Digital, same as all approvals in the system." So either Di Pietro approved his own inside man, or someone with Di Pietro's authorization code approved him. She leaned back. "Luca, who else has access to Di Pietro's authorization credentials?" The silence lasted 4 seconds this time. "His direct supervisor," Luca said, "for override purposes." "And Di Pietro's direct supervisor is?" Another pause. The air in the room changed temperature. She watched Luca's jaw tighten, the muscular tell of a man who had just arrived somewhere he did not want to be. "Marcus Vitali," he said. "He's been with the Dawn for 23 years. He manages our entire Eastern operation." Serafina looked at the data on the screen. She looked at the timeline. She looked at the $11 million that had moved through channels that someone with 23 years of institutional access would know like his own heartbeat. She thought about what Alessandro had said the night before. Loyalty built on debt is not loyalty. It's a delayed betrayal. "Get me Vitali's personnel file," she said. "Serafina," Luca started. "That's the first time you've used my name." He stopped. "Get me the file, Luca. I'm not accusing a 23-year veteran based on access logs alone. I'm following the evidence where it goes. That's what I was asked to do." He pulled the file. They spent the next 2 hours in the kind of focused, low-spoken work that produces either clarity or disaster, and by 5:30 in the afternoon, Serafina had assembled enough to present to Alessandro, not a definitive verdict, but a forensic map that pointed with uncomfortable precision toward Marcus Vitale as the architect and Roy Tessin as the executor of a diversion scheme that had been running for 14 months beneath everyone's notice. She called for Alessandro. He came downstairs and listened to her lay out the evidence. He stood and listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Alessandro picked up the transaction log she had set on the table and looked at it with the expression of a man reading the name of someone he trusted on a document he never wanted to see. "You're certain," he said. "I'm certain of what the evidence shows. Vitale's credentials authorize Tessin's access. The timing of the diversions correlates with Vitale's operational oversight windows. There are 3 financial accounts in Tessin's name at banks that Vitale's Consulting LLC has also used for processing." She paused. "I'm not certain of the motive, but I'd guess you are." Alessandro set the log down. Something moved through his face, grief or its hardened cousin, the version of grief that men in his position had learned to process without showing. "Marcus Vitale has a son who owes significant money to a rival family," he said quietly. "We knew about the debt. We were handling it through negotiation. Apparently Marcus decided to handle it another way. The room absorbed this. He was protecting his son, Serafina said. He was stealing from the family to protect his son. The reason does not change the act. No, she said, but it changes the approach to resolution. Alessandro looked at her sharply. You want justice, not punishment. That's what you said last night. She held his gaze. Vitale is 61 years old, and he's been loyal for 23 years before this. The rival family. What do they want for the son's debt? 400,000, which is substantially less than 11 million. Offer it. Offer it tonight. Recover what was diverted through a payment plan structured against Vitale's retirement assets. He has them. I can see them in the file. Remove him from the operational role, but don't destroy him. She paused. And bring Tessin in. He's the outside actor. He's the clean break. He gets removed cleanly. No loyalty complications. That's your resolution. Alessandro looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Luca, who was standing to the side with the particular stillness of a man recalibrating his understanding of a situation. Set the meeting with the Carbone family for tomorrow morning, Alessandro said. Tell them the Don wishes to resolve the matter of the Vitale debt personally. He looked back at Serafina. You have passed the first trial. She exhaled. Once. Controlled. Then her phone buzzed again. This time it was Maya's number. She picked it up and Maya's voice came through breathless and wrong, the specific pitch of someone who has just discovered something they wish they hadn't. I'm at the atelier, Maya said. I came to get the files like you said, and... A sound that might have been Maya steadying herself against something. Serafina, someone was already here. The archive room has been opened. The binders, the physical copies you told me to get, they're gone. All of them. The master drive, too. The drawer was forced. Someone with access to the building got here before I did. Serafina stood very still. When? She said. I don't know. Early this morning? The building manager isn't answering. Maya, listen to me carefully. Leave the building right now. Don't touch anything else. Go somewhere public and stay there until I contact you. Do not go home. Serafina, what is happening? I'll explain everything. Go now. She hung up. She turned to look at Alessandro, who was still at the table. Luca had straightened, reading the shift in the room. Damien's people broke into my atelier this morning, she said. They took my original design archive, physical copies, 4 years of pre-marriage design work that proves those intellectual property claims are mine and not Cross Industries. The cold clarity of it spread through her chest. He didn't just file legal motions. He sent someone in to physically remove the evidence. Alessandro's face didn't change in any dramatic way, but his hands, flat on the table, pressed down once, a small, controlled pressure, the kind of gesture that in another man would have been a fist. He couldn't have known about this location, Luca said, or about you and the Don. He doesn't need to know about this location. He's operating on a separate front entirely. She was already thinking through it, the architecture of what Damien was building. He files the divorce, he files the paternity petition. His lawyer calls me with the IP motion. While I'm processing all of that, someone goes into the atelier and removes the physical evidence that would anchor my counterclaims. She looked at Luca directly. He's not reacting to me. He mapped this out in advance and he's running a sequence. Then you need legal representation. Tonight. I need more than that. She looked at Alessandro. You said the Moretti family has financial networks, shipping, corporate structures. She paused. Do any of those corporate structures include an entertainment or media holding? Alessandro studied her. We have a minority stake in a media group. 3 outlets: print, digital, broadcast. I want to talk to their editorial director tomorrow morning. Why? Because Damien planned everything except one thing, she said. He planned for a woman who was alone. He did not plan for a woman with resources. She held the old man's gaze. You told me 30 days. I'm going to need you to open every door you can, because your soon-to-be ex-son-in-law just took the first swing, and I intend to answer it before he lands the second. Alessandro was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Outside, the city was going dark. The garment district settled into its evening register. The loading docks quiet, the fabric showrooms locked up, the street level belonging to whoever came out after the workers went home. Serafina stood at the window and looked at her own reflection in the glass. The midnight blue gown she'd worn to a charity gala she now felt had happened in a previous life. The shadows under her eyes, the absolute stillness of a woman who had moved through the longest day she could remember and arrived at its end still standing. Her hand went to her abdomen once, briefly, the reflex she was starting to recognize as its own language. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't know. She answered. "Ms. Vale." A voice she'd never heard, male, measured, carrying the cadence of someone who had rehearsed the opening but not the middle of the conversation. "My name is Tessin, Roy Tessin. I think we need to talk before your father's people find me, because I have information about Marcus Vitali that changes everything you think you know. And I also have information about your husband that you are not going to believe." She didn't put Tessin on speaker. She walked to the far corner of the room, away from Luca, away from Caruso, away from Alessandro, and kept her voice low and her back to the wall, the way she'd learned to stand in rooms where the power distribution was unclear. "How did you get this number?" she said. "Same way I got everything." Tessin's voice carried the particular tension of a man who had recently crossed a line he couldn't uncross and was managing the aftermath in real time. "I was inside your husband's operation for 8 months before Baltimore. Not Vitale's operation, Cross's." The room behind her went on with its quiet sounds. Luca typing, Caruso moving somewhere near the stairs. And she let that continue because she wasn't ready to announce this yet. "Explain that sentence," she said. "Damien Cross hired me 14 months ago. Through 3 cutouts, shell entities, legitimate-looking consulting contracts. He needed someone who could operate inside an organization without being visibly connected to him, someone with financial systems experience and no loyalty to whoever he was targeting." A pause. The Moretti Baltimore operation was the target. He wanted inside intelligence on how it ran, where the money moved, what the vulnerabilities were. The diversion scheme was the 11 million. That wasn't Vitale's idea. That was architecture I built on Cross's instruction. Serafina breathed in through her nose once, slowly. She pressed her free hand flat against the brick wall beside her and felt its cold through her palm. "And Vitale?" she said. "Vitale's son owed money to the Carbone family. That was real. Cross found it and used it. He approached Vitale directly 4 months into my operation, told him that unless Vitale provided authorization cover for the routing desk access, the Carbone debt would be called in violently. Vitale didn't steal anything. He was being extorted. The credentials, the approvals, so all of it was coerced." She kept her voice flat. "So the evidence I built today points to a man who is being leveraged, not a thief." "Yes. And the real architect of the theft is my husband. Your soon-to-be ex-husband." "Yes." Another pause. "He's been building a case against the Moretti financial network for 2 years, Ms. Vale. The Baltimore diversion was phase 1, generate enough internal suspicion and financial irregularity to destabilize the Eastern operation from within. Phase 2 was the divorce. He filed the paternity petition to create legal standing, because if he can establish himself as the father of your child in a contested proceeding, he gains discovery access to your personal financial history. And if your personal financial history can be connected to the Moretti family, even circumstantially, he can leverage that." She was very still. "Phase 3, Tessin said. "That's why I'm calling. He's moving on phase 3 now. Tonight. I don't know all of it. I was cut out 2 weeks ago when he decided I knew too much. But I know enough. He has someone inside the Moretti financial network who isn't Vitale. Someone higher." The cold in her palm spread up her arm. "Who?" she said. "I don't have a name. I have an access pattern and a contact protocol and nothing else. But whoever it is, they've been feeding cross intelligence on the Don's health for at least 6 months. He knows Alessandro is dying. He knows the succession timeline. And he's been positioning to use your child as a legal entry point into the inheritance before you can complete the trials." She turned around. Luca was looking at her now. He'd caught something in her posture, the way people who work in high-alert environments learn to read the room through peripheral signals. "Where are you?" she asked Tessin. That I'm not giving you. Not yet. I want protection first. Formal Moretti protection. Guaranteed by the Dawn personally. Then I'll come in. That's not how this works. I'm the only person who can tie Cross directly to the Baltimore operation. Without me, you have access logs and shell accounts, and a scared old man who is being blackmailed. With me, you have the architecture, the chain of instruction, the payment records Cross thought were buried. His voice tightened. I want out of this. I built something I didn't fully understand, and now I understand it, and I want out. That's the deal. She looked at Alessandro across the room. I'll call you back in 10 minutes, she said. She put the phone down and gave Alessandro the summary in 4 sentences. The room processed it the way rooms process information that restructures everything, with a brief, dense silence where the air seems to compress. Luca spoke first. It's a trap. It might be, Serafina said. Or it's a man who is genuinely frightened and made a calculation that the Moretti family is safer than Damien Cross right now. If Tessin built the diversion on Cross's instruction, then Cross knows what Tessin knows, which means Cross knows Tessin is a liability, which means Damien might already be moving to close that liability. She looked at Caruso. Can you locate a cell phone signal from a number if I give it to you? Caruso had the expression of a man who considered that question to be roughly equivalent to asking if he could breathe. Yes. I need it in 10 minutes. She called Tessin back at the 9-minute mark. She kept him talking for 4 minutes, asking questions she already knew parts of the answers to, not because she needed the information, but because she needed the signal time. When she hung up, Caruso had an address on a screen, a motel on the west side of the Hudson in a New Jersey town called Fairvale, 17 miles from where they were standing. I want 2 people at that address in the next 30 minutes, she told Alessandro. Not to bring him in by force, to make sure he survives the night. Alessandro gestured to Caruso. Caruso made a call. Then Alessandro looked at Serafina with an expression she hadn't seen from him yet. If what this man says is accurate, he said slowly, then your husband has been running an intelligence operation against this family for 2 years. He married you without knowing about your connection to me. Or he married you because he suspected it. She hadn't gotten there yet. She got there now. How public was my mother's history? She asked. Her disappearance from the family was known within our circles. Her assumed name, Vele, was not publicly connected to Moretti in any documented way, but someone with sophisticated research capability, going back far enough, looking at property records, immigration documents, the right Swiss bank archives. Alessandro stopped. It would have taken considerable resources and considerable reason to look. He met me at a trade event in Milan, Serafina said, 7 years ago. I was 25. I'd been designing for 3 years. I had a small reputation and no money. She heard her own voice going mechanical, the way it did when she was processing something that hurt and refused to let it show. He pursued me, aggressively, spent 6 months before he proposed. Tell me about the 6 months. He asked a great many questions about my family background. I told him my mother was Italian-Swiss descent, deceased, no living relatives I knew of. She stopped. He was very interested in that. I thought it was empathy. He'd lost his own parents young, or so he said. The silence in the room had a different texture now. Luca had stopped typing. Even Caruso, who had returned from making his call, was still. He didn't marry me because he loved me, she said. Not a question. Working through it aloud because it needed to be said in the air. He married me because he suspected or had confirmed a Moretti connection, and he needed a legitimate personal relationship to build a predatory position around. Alessandro said nothing, which was its own answer. And the child, she said. Serafina, the child. Her voice didn't waver. He contested paternity immediately, not because he doubts it. He knows it's his, or he has enough medical access through Dr. Henley to know the dates eliminate any other possibility. He's contesting it to generate legal proceedings that give him discovery access. You said it yourself. If he can establish legal paternity in a contested proceeding, he gets to subpoena financial records. She breathed. He wants the child as a legal instrument, not as a child. The room held that sentence for a moment. Then she picked up the phone again. She called a number Alessandro had given her 2 hours ago. The family's retained attorney, a man named Rice, who operated out of a firm in Lower Manhattan that didn't advertise and didn't need to. It was after 9 o'clock. He answered on the second ring. "File an emergency motion tonight," she said, "contesting the paternity petition on the grounds of harassment and bad faith litigation. I want an affidavit attached documenting the break-in at my atelier this morning. I'll have the details to you within the hour. And I want a motion to compel disclosure of any financial relationship between Damien Cross and a consulting entity connected to a man named Roy Tesson. Can you do that tonight?" "I can have the filing ready by midnight," Rice said. "Do it." She hung up and allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of stillness. 3 seconds in which she was a woman who had, in the past 24 hours, lost her marriage, her studio, her financial foundation, the design archive she'd spent 4 years building, and the version of her personal history she'd believed entirely. 3 seconds in which the child inside her, the one who didn't know anything, the one for whom none of this had happened yet, continued its 152 beats per minute with the stubborn, indifferent insistence of new life. Then the 3 seconds ended. "Second trial," she said to Alessandro. "You said there were 3. What's the second one?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You passed the first trial 4 hours ago. And Damien Cross is running a Phase 3 operation tonight that I don't fully understand yet, which means I don't have time to sequence this the way you planned it. What's the second trial?" Alessandro set both hands flat on the table. "The second trial is called the table. You are required to negotiate a resolution to an active conflict between 2 Moretti-aligned families without violence and without conceding territory. There is a dispute between the Carbone family and our Greenwich network over a shipping contract. It has been escalating for 3 weeks, and 2 men have already been hospitalized." He paused. "You would need to sit across a table from Enzo Carbone. He is 64 years old and has never in his life negotiated with a woman." "Set the meeting." "Serafina. Tonight, Alessandro. Set the meeting tonight. I'll sit across from Enzo Carbone at midnight if I have to." She held his gaze with the specific steadiness of someone who had burned the bridge behind them and was now committed to the distance ahead. "You told me 30 days. I'm going to need fewer than that." Alessandro looked at his daughter, really looked at her, the way he had in the car, and then only that once, and said quietly, "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, I will arrange it." Then he stood and walked toward the stairs with the careful deliberateness of a man conserving a body that was running out of time, and at the foot of the stairs he paused and said, without turning around, "Your mother negotiated her own freedom from this family with nothing but her nerve in 3 sentences. She would find you recognizable tonight." And then he went upstairs. Luca was looking at her from the table. She looked back. "Whatever you're calculating," she said, "say it." "I'm not calculating." He closed the laptop in front of him. "I owe you an acknowledgement. I checked your work on the Vitale evidence twice this afternoon because I didn't trust that you'd done it right. You did it right. You did it better than I would have." "Is that difficult for you to say?" "Yes." "Good. It should be." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, because her back had been sending serious warnings for the past hour, and she was 22 weeks away from the 3rd trimester, and she was allowed to sit. "Tell me everything you know about what Cross might be planning for Phase 3. Not what Tesson told me. What you know from the inside. The Moretti Financial Network has a leak. You've been managing the Eastern finances for 4 years. Who could it be?" Luca was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means the answer exists and the person is deciding whether to give it. "There are 4 people with broad enough access to have fed Cross the Dawn's health timeline," he said slowly. "I'm one of them, which you should know up front, because you'll figure it out and I'd rather you hear it from me." "Are you the leak?" "No." "How do I know that?" "You don't. Not yet." He held her gaze steadily. "The other 3 are Caruso, who has been with Alessandro for 30 years and whose loyalty I would stake my life on. A woman named Petra Voss, no relation to Damien's lawyer, who manages our Swiss accounts and has never been in a room with anyone from Cross Industries as far as I can document. And a man named Declan Ward, who handles our domestic legal coordination, and who has over the past 8 months developed a friendship with a partner at the law firm that Gerald Voss works at." Serafina went very still. Declan Ward, she said. He joined the family 3 years ago. Came with strong references from 2 Moretti-aligned families in Chicago. But if someone wanted to build a case about the Don's health and the succession timeline, a domestic legal coordinator would have exactly the access to do it. Medical power of attorney documents, estate planning updates, succession framework filings. Is he here? In this building? No, he works from a separate location. He's not read in on the safe house. But he's read in on the succession framework. She sat forward. He knows I exist. He knows about the 30-day timeline. If he's the leak, yes, Cross would know everything. The thing that shifted in her chest then wasn't fear. It was the recognition of a specific kind of danger. The kind that is already inside the perimeter, already wearing the right clothes, already knowing the right names. The kind you can't see coming because it arrived before you did. I want Ward brought in for a conversation, she said. Not confronted. Brought in on a pretense. Tell him the Don wants a legal briefing on the succession documentation, something routine. Can you arrange that without tipping him? Yes. Tomorrow, before the Carbone meeting. She paused. And I want the conversation recorded. Luca nodded once. Her phone buzzed. Maya's number. She picked it up. I did what you said. Maya's voice was steadier now, the post-adrenaline register. I'm at the coffee place on 46th, but Serafina, I need to tell you something. Before I left the atelier, when I was checking whether anything else had been taken, a breath. I checked the filing cabinet in the back room, the one with the business formation documents. Yes. The incorporation papers for the atelier, the original ones from when you set it up in 2019 before the marriage. A pause. They were still there. Whoever took the archives didn't take those. But I looked at them because I wanted to make sure. And Serafina, there's something wrong with them. What do you mean wrong? The co-founder line, Maya's voice dropped. I've looked at these papers 100 times. I know what they say, but there's a name on the co-founder line that I don't remember being there before. A shell company name, Ventu Capital Partners. I looked it up while I was waiting for you to call. Ventu Capital Partners is registered in Delaware. Its sole director is listed as a man named Gordon Ashby. She paused. Gordon Ashby is on the board of Cross Industries. He's Damien's CFO. Serafina's hand tightened on the phone. Those papers say Damien's CFO co-founded my atelier, she said. They say his shell company did, which would mean the atelier wasn't entirely yours from the beginning, which would mean the intellectual property anchor isn't as clean as I thought. Her voice was flat. She was already seeing the shape of it. Maya, those papers were altered. Damien's people didn't just come in to take the archives. They came in to take the archives and replace the incorporation documents with altered versions. The ones they left behind were meant to be found. Silence. He's been planning this since before I was pregnant, Serafina said. Not to Maya, to herself. Since before the marriage. He built a paper trail into my own founding documents that ties him to the atelier legally. So if I claim the pre-marriage IP is mine, he produces altered incorporation papers showing his entity was there from the start. She hung up. She sat for a moment with the phone on the table in front of her. Her atelier. The thing she had built from absolutely nothing, from the dressmaker's shop in the months after her mother died, from the 4 discarded drafts, from the 11 days it had taken to get a single design right. The thing that was entirely hers. He had reached back 4 years and put his name in it. He had built a door into her history and installed himself behind it. She stood up abruptly. The chair scraped back. Luca looked at her. I need a forensic document analyst, she said. Tonight, someone who can authenticate the age of ink on a corporate filing. I know someone. Get them. She was walking to the stairs because she needed 30 seconds of vertical movement before she could sit still again when Caruso came through the ground floor door with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not alarm. Caruso didn't do alarm, but its close, controlled relative. We have a situation, he said. Our people reached the motel in Fairvale, room 12, where Tesson's phone signal terminated. He paused. The room is empty, no sign of forced entry. His phone was on the bed. No Tesson. Serafina stopped on the stairs. How long since his signal went dark?
40 minutes. 40 minutes. She had called him back 9 minutes after the first call, kept him talking for 4. Then Caruso had dispatched people. Transit time, 17 miles on a weeknight, 25 minutes maybe less. The window between Tessin hanging up and their people arriving was approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes for someone to collect Roy Tessin from a motel room in New Jersey and remove every trace of his presence. Damien knew we were going to him, she said. It appears so. Which means the conversation I had with Tessin was monitored. This phone, she held it up, the clean line Caruso had given her, the sealed plastic sleeve. Or this building. Caruso's face was very controlled. The phone is clean. I swept the building this morning. Then one of the 4 people I spoke with after Tessin's call contacted Cross's operation. She came back down the stairs. She looked at Luca, who was still at the table. She looked at Caruso. She looked at the woman who had brought Alessandro his espresso that morning, who was now standing in the doorway to the back corridor. Who is in this building? She said. Right now, everyone. Caruso listed them. 11 people, including herself and Alessandro. She processed the list. Her eyes moved to Luca. Ward isn't here, Luca said, reading her. He doesn't know this location. Someone does. She walked to the center of the room. Her back hurt. Her feet hurt. She had been awake for 36 hours on 4 hours of sleep, and the previous night's performance of a charity gala felt like something that had happened to someone else in a country she had visited once. Someone in this building communicated Tessin's location to Damien Cross's people within a 15-minute window. Either Tessin was already being monitored before he called me, which is possible, which would mean Cross anticipated this move, or there is a secondary leak closer than Ward. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at the brick walls and the iron columns and the industrial floors, and she thought about her mother, Elena Vale, who had been born Margarita Moretti and had chosen to walk away from all of this, who had died in a hospital bed in Lausanne with $3,000 in debt and had left her daughter nothing but stubbornness and an unpronounceable last name in the instruction, never spoken, only modeled, that you survive by refusing to stop. She thought about the heartbeat, 152 beats per minute. The child who was going to be born into a world being actively shaped by a man who saw it as a legal instrument and a woman who was going to make sure that was not the world it arrived in. She thought about Damien Cross, somewhere in this city right now, in the penthouse that had been hers until last night, probably looking at a phone with information about her movements, building the next phase of a campaign he had been running for years against a family he still didn't know she was about to inherit. She turned to Caruso. Wake Alessandro, she said. I know he said 7 o'clock. Wake him now. She looked at Luca. Pull Ward's communication logs for the past 48 hours, all of them. She looked at the woman in the doorway. I need food. I need to eat. And I need someone to get me a change of clothes because I have been in this gown for 22 hours and I am going to need to sit across a table from Enzo Carboni in the morning, and I intend to do it dressed like the woman who owns the room. Nobody moved for a half second, the brief lag of people recalibrating command structure. Then they moved. She sat back down at the table and pulled the laptop toward her and opened Tessin's financial record files. The one she'd assembled in the afternoon, the documentation of the Baltimore operation, and began building the formal evidentiary package that would connect every thread back to Damien Cross. She was 20 minutes in when Luca set a printed sheet beside her without saying anything. She picked it up. Declan Ward's communication logs, the past 48 hours. Most of it was routine, internal scheduling, document requests, calendar confirmations. At 9:23 p.m., 47 minutes ago, an outgoing call from Ward's office line to a number she didn't recognize. Duration, 4 minutes. She ran the number through the directory Luca had open on the second laptop. The number was registered to a hospitality company called Aurelius Events. Aurelius Events was a Delaware LLC. Its registered agent was the same firm that had incorporated Ventu Capital Partners, Damien's CFO's shell company. Declan Ward had called Damien Cross's network at 9:23 p.m., 17 minutes after her conversation with Tessin, and the call had lasted 4 minutes.
long enough to give an address, a room number, and an instruction. She set the paper down. She looked at the evidence in front of her. The Baltimore files, the alteration of her incorporation documents, the ward communication log, Tesson's vanishing, the altered succession framework. And she understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that she was not dealing with a man who had reacted to her. She was dealing with a man who had been 3 steps ahead of everyone in this room for 2 years. And the only way to deal with a man who was 3 steps ahead was to stop trying to catch up and start building a game he wasn't playing. She looked up at Luca. "The Carbone meeting tomorrow," she said. "I want to change the terms of it. It hasn't been set yet. When it's set, I want Enzo Carbone to come in believing he's negotiating a shipping contract. But the actual conversation I want to have with him is about Damian Cross." She held Luca's gaze. "Because if Cross has been building intelligence on the Moretti network for 2 years, he's approached every family adjacent to ours. He's offered something to somebody. I want to know who said yes and who said no, and Enzo Carbone has been in this business long enough to know." She paused. "And I want Ward brought in before the meeting, not as a routine briefing. I want him brought in and I want to be in the room. Because the man who told Damian where Roy Tesson was hiding is sitting in an office right now thinking he's untouchable, and I want to look him in the face when he discovers he is not." Luca looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll make the calls." She nodded and turned back to the laptop. At 11:47 p.m., Declan Ward walked into the operations room of the safe house with the composed expression of a man who had been summoned for a routine briefing and had no reason to be otherwise. He was 50, trim, wearing a jacket over a collared shirt, carrying a leather document portfolio. He looked at Serafina and registered her presence with a flicker of adjustment. She was new, she was young, she was sitting at the head of the table. And then he looked at Luca and said, "I was told the Dawn needed a succession review." "Sit down, Declan," Luca said. Ward sat. He placed the portfolio on the table. He folded his hands on top of it with the practiced calm of a man who had sat across from difficult situations before and managed them through composure and careful language. Serafina slid the printed communication log across the table without preamble. 9:23 p.m. tonight, 4 minutes. Aurelius Events, which is Damian Cross's network. A man named Roy Tesson was removed from a motel in Fairvale within 15 minutes of that call. She watched his face. "I'm not asking if you made it. I'm asking why." The composure lasted 3 seconds. Then something beneath it shifted. Not guilt, not quite, but the specific exhaustion of a man whose architecture had just been identified in a single move and who had no secondary position prepared. "I want an attorney," Ward said. "You work for a family that doesn't require that formality for internal matters," she said. "You can have every attorney you want after this conversation. Right now I want to know what Cross offered you and how long you've been feeding him." Ward looked at the log. He looked at Serafina. He looked at Luca, who gave him nothing. Then his shoulders dropped. Barely, half an inch, the physical grammar of a man releasing a weight he'd been carrying too long. And he said, 14 months. He came to me through an intermediary. He offered to clear a debt, personal, nothing to do with the family." His voice was flat, stripped of its professional finish. "I gave him the Dawn's medical timeline, the succession framework dates, general network structure, nothing operational." He paused. "I didn't know about you. I didn't know a succession candidate existed until 3 days ago." "But you told him 3 days ago?" Ward said nothing, which was its own answer. Serafina sat back. She looked at the man across the table, not with rage, because rage was a luxury she could not presently afford, and said quietly and finally, "You gave a man who is trying to steal my child's inheritance a 3-day head start." She let that land. "That ends tonight." She looked at Caruso, who was standing at the door. "Make sure he's comfortable," she said. "He's not going anywhere until after the Carbone meeting." She closed the laptop, stood up, and walked toward the stairs. Tomorrow was already beginning, and she had not yet slept, and the second trial was 6 hours away, and somewhere in this city Damian Cross was 3 steps ahead and about to discover that she had stopped trying to catch up. She slept 3 hours. Not because 3 hours was enough, but because her body made the decision without consulting her. She sat on the edge of the bed at 12:40 a.m., intending to review the Carbone briefing materials Luca had left outside her door. And the next thing she knew, it was 3:55 a.m., and the papers were still in her hand, and the room was dark, and her neck ached from the angle. She showered in 5 minutes. The clothes that had been sourced for her were folded on the chair by the door: dark trousers, a slate gray structured blazer, a white shirt, flat shoes that would not punish her for standing in them. Someone had good judgment. She dressed, drank the water on the nightstand, put both hands flat on the dresser, and looked at herself in the mirror for 10 seconds. She looked like a woman who had slept 3 hours and was about to walk into a room with a 64-year-old man who had never negotiated with a woman and had no intention of starting. She looked like a woman who had lost her studio, her marriage, her history, and her founding documents in 48 hours. She looked, she thought, exactly like what she was. Someone with nothing left to protect, except the child in the future, which meant someone with nothing left to lose. She went downstairs at 4:15. Luca was already at the table. He had not, she suspected, slept at all. There were 2 espresso cups in front of him, and a third he pushed toward her when she sat, which she picked up and drank without comment, because the child's second trimester guidelines on caffeine were a concern for a morning that didn't involve organized crime negotiations. "Ward," she said. "Secured. Cooperative as of 2 hours ago. He gave us the full contact protocol he used to reach Cross's network. Intermediary names, communication schedule, dead drop locations." Luca's voice was level, but carried the specific texture of a man who had spent the night revising his understanding of how compromised his operation was. "It's more extensive than we thought. Cross has been running a parallel intelligence network against the Moretti Eastern operation for 26 months. 26, not 14. The Baltimore diversion was 14 months. The intelligence gathering started before that. He was mapping the network before he built the attack against it." Luca looked at her. "He did the same thing to 2 other families. The Scaletti operation in Philadelphia, they had an internal embezzlement scandal 18 months ago that nearly fractured the family. The Brunau network in Boston, a shipping dispute that went violent and cost them 3 people and a port contract." He paused. "Both situations had Cross Industries' fingerprints on the periphery. We didn't connect them at the time." Serafina set the espresso cup down. "He's been doing this systematically, identifying organized crime-adjacent financial networks, destabilizing them from within, and then moving in on the assets or the alliances once the organization is weakened. Yes, and the Moretti network is the largest target he's attempted. By a significant margin." She absorbed this. "Then Enzo Carbone may already know more about Cross than we do. If Cross approached the Scaletti and Brunau families, he approached Carbone too. The question is what Carbone's answer was." She stood. "When does he arrive?" 9 o'clock. He's bringing 2 people, his consigliere and 1 other. He thinks he's here to negotiate the shipping contract." "He's not wrong that we'll negotiate it, but the real conversation happens first." She looked at Luca. "How does Carbone feel about outside interference in family business?" Luca almost smiled. It was the first time she'd seen anything close to it. "Enzo Carbone once drove 4 hours to deliver a personal message to a federal consultant who had inserted himself into a Carbone arbitration. The consultant retired from consulting after that." "Good," she said. "Then he and I have something in common." Alessandro came down at 7. He moved worse in the early morning. The cardiovascular reality showing itself most clearly in that first hour, the body's overnight accumulation of limits. He sat at the table and looked at the briefing summary Luca had prepared and said nothing for several minutes. Then he said, "You should have slept more. You should have told me about your network leak 12 hours earlier." A pause. "Fair." She sat across from him. "Alessandro, when Carbone arrives, I need to run this meeting. Not you, me." He looked at her over the briefing papers. "If I sit in that room as your daughter, as a successor candidate being introduced, Carbone manages me at arm's length. He's polite. He's careful. He gives me nothing." She held his gaze. "But if I run the room, if I present the Cross intelligence as something I developed and I control, he has to decide what I am. And that decision will tell me everything about where he stands. Enzo Carbone does not respond well to being managed." I'm not going to manage him. I'm going to give him something valuable and watch what he does with it. She paused. The way you've been watching me for 32 years. Alessandro was quiet for a moment. Then he set the papers down. The room is yours, he said. Enzo Carbone arrived at 8:53, which told her he was the kind of man who showed up early to establish that his time was the variable. He was broader than she'd expected. Not tall, but built with the density of a man who had never stopped being physical about his problems, even at 64. Gray hair cropped close. A face that had been handsome once and was now something more useful, authoritative. He wore a dark suit and no tie, and he walked into the operations room and looked at Serafina with the specific expression of a man who has been told something and is deciding whether to believe it. His consigliere was a thin man named Ruiz, who stood to Carbone's left and said nothing. The third person, and this was the first surprise of the morning, was a woman, late 30s, dark-suited, with the careful posture of someone trained in security. She positioned herself near the door without being asked. Carbone looked at Alessandro. Dawn. A nod. Respectful, but the respect of an equal, not a subordinate. Then he looked at Serafina again. And this is... Serafina, she said before Alessandro could answer. I run this meeting. Sit down, Mr. Carbone. The room held its breath for 2 seconds. Carbone looked at her with an expression that moved through surprise, irritation, and something that hadn't resolved itself yet. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat. She put the cross-intelligence summary on the table. 14 pages, printed, organized chronologically. Tassen's account, the Baltimore architecture, Ward's communication logs, the Scaletti and Brunel pattern analysis. She had assembled it between 4 and 7 a.m. with Luca's documentation support. Damien Cross, she said. He approached you, probably 8 to 12 months ago. He offered something, a financial arrangement, an alliance, an intelligence partnership. I need to know what he said and what you answered. Carbone looked at the papers. He didn't touch them. He looked at her. You're the daughter. Yes. Moretti blood. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with an assessment that was not hostile but was absolutely thorough, the way a man looks at something he needs to categorize before he can decide what to do with it. Then he reached out and picked up the top page of the summary and read it. He read the next page. He read the third. Ruiz leaned in slightly beside him. The woman at the door remained still. Carbone set the papers down at page 4. He came to me 10 months ago, he said, through an intermediary. A financial consultant I'd used before, legitimate man, didn't know what he was carrying. Cross's offer was a joint venture, access to Carbone port facilities in exchange for intelligence on Moretti shipping routes and financial architecture. He paused. I had the intermediary's car towed and his consulting license anonymously reported to 3 regulatory bodies. He looked at Serafina directly. I don't do business with men who buy other people's houses out from under them. She breathed. Once. He went to Scaletti and Brunel first. I know. Scaletti's people told me about the Philadelphia situation 6 months ago. We suspected a connected hand. We didn't have documentation. He looked at the summary again. You have documentation. Enough to present to a council. Enough to connect Cross to 2 years of coordinated attacks on 3 separate organizations. She held his gaze. The shipping contract dispute between your family and the Moretti Greenwich network. I want to resolve it today. I want to resolve it fairly, which means I want to hear your actual terms rather than the opening position your lawyer filed. She paused. And in exchange, I want your support at the Succession Council. Not silence. Active support. Carbone looked at Alessandro, who was sitting to Serafina's left, and had not said a word since the meeting began. Something passed between the 2 older men, the compressed communication of people who have known each other a long time and don't need full sentences. Then Carbone looked back at her. The Greenwich contract. We want rate parity with the Moretti, New Jersey operation. Same tonnage fees, same priority scheduling. I can give you rate parity. I can't give you scheduling priority over existing contracts. She didn't hesitate. but I can offer you first right of refusal on any new scheduling capacity that opens in the next 18 months, in writing, before you leave this building. Carbone's eyes moved. The small recalibration of a man who had come in expecting to fight for a position and been offered something more valuable than the position. Done, he said. Then we're agreed. She extended her hand across the table. He looked at the hand. He looked at her face. He shook it, firm, brief, the handshake of a man who meant it. One more thing, she said, and kept his hand for one extra second before releasing it. Cross is moving tonight. I don't have the full shape of Phase 3 yet, but it involves the Succession Council and it involves legal proceedings around my child. If you hear anything through your channels, you'll know before the hour is out, Carbone said. He stood. He looked at Alessandro one final time. She'll do, he said. Not to Serafina, to Alessandro, with the particular gruffness of a man delivering high praise through the narrowest possible aperture. Then he walked out. The room exhaled. Luca's phone rang 40 seconds later. He picked it up, listened for 8 seconds, and looked at Serafina with an expression that reassembled her understanding of the morning in one glance. Tessin, he said. He surfaced. He's alive. Cross's people held him overnight and released him an hour ago. They didn't hurt him. He paused. He says Cross released him deliberately. He says Cross sent him back with a message. What message? Luca looked at the phone. Cross knows about the Succession Council. He knows the timeline and the location. He's filed an emergency legal motion in federal court claiming that the Moretti succession framework constitutes evidence of a criminal enterprise and requesting a temporary injunction that would freeze any asset transfer pending investigation. He looked up. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. She stood very still. A federal injunction on the succession framework. If it was granted, even temporarily, even as a procedural hold, no asset transfer could occur. No inheritance, no formal recognition. The 30-day clock Alessandro had given her would become irrelevant because the mechanism for succession would be legally frozen before she could complete the third trial. He can't get that injunction granted overnight, she said. Federal proceedings. He has a federal judge, the Honorable Patricia Weir, Eastern District. She signed the hearing order 40 minutes ago. Luca set the phone down. Cross has a federal judge, Serafina. The silence in the room was the specific silence of people who have just watched the ground change beneath them. She turned to Alessandro. He was sitting very still, his hands flat on the table, looking at nothing. And she saw it then, saw what the past 48 hours had cost him physically, the gray beneath the stillness, the way his breathing had become more careful and deliberate since he'd sat down. The 60 to 90 days his cardiologist had given him were not uniformly distributed. Some days were worse than others. This was one of the worst ones. The third trial, she said. What is it? Alessandro looked at her. The table was the second. You passed it an hour ago. His voice was slower than it had been. The third trial is called the Council. You must stand before the full Succession Council, every Moretti capo, every allied family representative, every financial partner with a seat, and make the case for your succession publicly. No documentation does it for you. No one else speaks on your behalf. You stand and you make the argument and they vote. When is the council scheduled? 3 days from now. Move it to tonight, she said. Alessandro looked at her sharply. The council requires, move it to tonight, Alessandro. Because tomorrow morning a federal judge is going to hear a motion that could freeze the entire succession mechanism, and if that injunction lands before the council votes, it won't matter how many trials I've passed. She walked to the table and leaned on it with both hands. Call every capo, call every representative. Tell them the council convenes at 8 p.m. Tell them the Dawn requests their presence and the matter is urgent. She held his gaze. You've been waiting 32 years for this. I've been waiting 3 days. Tonight is the night. Alessandro looked at his daughter for a long moment. His breathing was deliberate. His hands were flat and still. Behind his eyes, something that had been waiting a very long time was making its final decision. Luca, he said, make the calls. Luca reached for his phone, and then Serafina's phone rang. The number belonging to Gerald Voss, Damien's lawyer, the number she had told herself she would not answer again. She answered it. Ms. Vale, Voss's voice had shed its professional calibration. Underneath it was something raw. I need to speak with you outside of my capacity as Mr. Cross's counsel. I need to speak with you as an individual who has become aware of something that... He stopped. Started again. Mr. Cross has obtained medical records. Your medical records. Specifically, records from your 20-week prenatal examination that were altered before being submitted to the court in support of the paternity petition. She gripped the phone. Altered how? The fetal genetic markers. Someone with access to the laboratory system substituted records from a different patient. The records Cross submitted suggest the child's paternity is inconsistent with his. Voss's voice was almost inaudible now. He is going to use those records at the federal hearing tomorrow to argue that your pregnancy is part of a fraudulent scheme to manufacture an heir for the Moretti succession. He's going to claim you are not pregnant by him, not legitimately connected to the Moretti bloodline, and that the entire succession framework is a criminal fabrication. A pause. Ms. Vale, I've been a lawyer for 31 years, and I have never... I am calling you because what he is asking me to submit constitutes fraud on a federal court, and I will not... Gerald. Her voice was completely flat. Is the original laboratory file intact, the unaltered version? I believe so. The laboratory system retains source files for 7 years. Then I need you to do one thing. One thing, and then you are free of this. Obtain an authenticated copy of the original unaltered prenatal record and send it to my attorney, Rice, tonight. Can you do that? A long silence. Yes, Voss said. God help me, yes. She hung up. She looked at Luca. She looked at Caruso. She looked at the room, the brick walls, the iron columns, the industrial floor, and she thought, Damian Cross had forged her incorporation documents, stolen her design archive, bribed a federal judge, had her medical records altered, and arranged to have a man disappear from a New Jersey motel room, all within 48 hours of serving her divorce papers at a charity gala. He was thorough. She had always known he was thorough. She was thorough too. She had just been thorough about different things. Get Rice on the phone, she told Luca, and get me the contact for whatever forensic laboratory we use for document authentication. Because tonight, I'm going to walk into a succession council with every piece of evidence we have. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to walk into a federal courthouse with the rest of it. And Damian Cross is going to discover that he spent 2 years building a case against a woman who didn't yet know who she was. She picked up her jacket from the chair. He does not get to make that mistake twice. Her phone buzzed one more time. A message from Maya. 2 words and an image. The 2 words were, found it. The image was a photograph of a document. An older document, paper slightly yellowed, handwriting she didn't immediately recognize. And as she expanded the image and read the header, the thing it contained reached through the screen and rearranged every calculation she had made in the past 60 seconds. It was a letter, dated 14 years ago, written by Damian Cross to a private investigator named Heiress, authorizing a genealogical search on a woman named Elena Vale, formerly Margarita Moretti, and any living descendants. 14 years ago. Damian Cross had been 27 years old. He had not yet met Serafina. He had been looking for her, or looking for someone like her, for 7 years before he walked into that trade event in Milan and pretended it was coincidence. He had never been in love with her. He had never been surprised by her. He had found her and built a life around her with the specific, patient, 14-year intention of arriving at exactly this moment. The moment when Alessandro Moretti was dying and a successor was needed, and a man with the right legal relationship to the heir could insert himself into the largest criminal inheritance in America. She had not been his wife. She had been his operation. She stood with the phone in her hand and the image on the screen, and she felt something move through her chest that was not grief and not rage, but the compound of both at absolute zero, cold, crystalline, and completely clarifying. She put the phone in her jacket pocket. The council, she said. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, Luca confirmed. She walked to the stairs. Her back hurt. Her feet hurt. The child moved, a small interior flutter that she had first felt 4 days ago and still did not have language for. The specific sensation of something alive that was entirely separate from her and entirely dependent on her simultaneously. She put her hand on the railing. "Luca," she said without turning around. "Yes." "When this is over, the council, the federal hearing, all of it, I'm going to need a new atelier, new lease, new team structure, accounts entirely separate from anything connected to Cross Industries." She paused on the first step. "Start looking." She heard him exhale, the breath of a man who had spent the night revising his assessment of a situation and had arrived somewhere he hadn't expected. "Already am," he said. She went upstairs to prepare for the last thing standing between her and everything. The Succession Council met at 8 o'clock in a room that had been waiting for this moment for 50 years. It was in the basement of a building Alessandro owned outright through 4 layers of corporate structure, a former printing house in Red Hook, Brooklyn, with walls thick enough to contain whatever happened inside them, and a ceiling high enough that the room didn't feel like a trap, even when it was functioning as one. The table was long and dark and old, the kind of furniture that carries the weight of every conversation that has happened around it. 14 chairs, 12 of them filled by the time Serafina walked in at 7:58. Capos she had never met, allied family representatives who had driven or flown in on 4 hours' notice, 2 financial partners who had arrived in separate cars from separate directions and sat at opposite ends of the table without acknowledging each other. Enzo Carboni was there. He had come back. He sat 3 chairs from the head of the table, and when Serafina entered, he looked at her with the expression of a man who had already made his decision and was waiting to see if she would make the room deserve it. Alessandro sat to the right of the head chair. The head chair was empty. It was going to stay empty until the council decided who filled it, which was the point of the evening. Luca stood at the far wall with 2 other men whose names she had learned in the past 6 hours and already trusted more than people she'd known for years, which was either a sign of good instincts or the compressed intimacy of crisis. Probably both. She walked to the head of the table and stood behind the chair and did not sit. She looked at the room, every face in it, one by one, not quickly, not performing confidence, but actually looking, actually registering the individual weight of each person's presence and skepticism and history. She let it take 30 seconds. Nobody spoke. Then she said, "My name is Serafina Vale. My mother was born Margherita Moretti. My father is Alessandro Moretti, who is sitting to my right and who has less time than any of us would like, which is why we're in this room tonight instead of in 3 days." She pulled out the chair and sat. "I'm going to tell you what I know, what I've done in the past 72 hours, and what I intend. Then you'll vote. That's the structure." She put the evidentiary package on the table. Luca had printed 20 copies, and they went around the room in both directions while she talked. She told them about Damien Cross. Not as her husband. She barely used that word. She told them about him as an operator, the 14-year genealogical search that had preceded their meeting in Milan, the systematic intelligence operation he had run against 3 crime-adjacent financial networks, the Baltimore diversion scheme and Roy Tessin and Declan Ward, the forged incorporation documents and the stolen design archive and the altered prenatal records and the federal judge who had signed a hearing order for 10 o'clock the following morning. She told it in sequence, without editorializing, without raising her voice. The room was very quiet. These were men and women who had spent their lives in a world where betrayal was a structural feature rather than an exception, and even they were quiet. When she finished, a man named Sorrentino, a capo who ran the Moretti construction interests in New Jersey and had the face of someone who had heard every kind of story and believed very few of them, said, "The federal hearing, if the injunction is granted, it won't be granted," she said. "You can't guarantee that." "No. But I can tell you that as of 2 hours ago, my attorney filed a counter-motion supported by authenticated forensic documentation of the altered prenatal records, the forged incorporation papers, and a 14-year paper trail connecting Damien Cross to a coordinated campaign of fraud and document tampering." She held Sorrentino's gaze. "Judge Weir signed a hearing order in 40 minutes for a petitioner she's had financial relationships with. That fact is also in the counter-motion, with documentation. Judge Weir will recuse herself before 9 a.m. tomorrow or face a judicial conduct complaint that goes public before noon." Silence. Carbone made a sound that might have been, in a different register, a laugh. A woman at the far end of the table, Petra Voss, the Swiss accounts manager, whose presence at the council Alessandro had requested specifically because she had been the one person in the network Cross had never been able to reach, said, "The third trial. You understand what this council represents?" "Yes." "It's not a formality. The vote must be unanimous among full council members. One dissent and the succession does not proceed." "I understand." Petra looked at her steadily. "Then I want to ask you something that is not about Cross and not about the trials, and not about what you've built in the past 72 hours. She paused. "When your father is gone, and he will be gone sooner than any of us want, what does this family become?" The Don built this organization on fear and discipline and a particular kind of violence that has kept it intact for 50 years. You are not him. You are not built the same way. So what does it become under you, and why should we trust that what it becomes is something worth protecting? The room shifted. Not physically. Nobody moved, but the quality of the attention changed. This was the question underneath all the other questions. This was the one Sorrentino and the others had come to hear answered. Serafina was quiet for 3 seconds. She thought about what she could say. The strategic answer, the answer that mapped to what the room expected. She decided against it. "It becomes something that doesn't require you to be afraid of it to work inside it," she said. "My father built loyalty through a combination of genuine care and genuine terror, and for 50 years that combination held. I'm not going to pretend I can replicate the terror component, and I'm not going to pretend I want to. What I can build is a structure where the people inside it are loyal because they've made a calculation that loyalty is worth more to them than betrayal, not because they're afraid of what happens if they defect, but because what they're protecting is actually worth protecting." She paused. Marcus Vitale was coerced into covering for an outside operator because his son was in debt and he had no recourse except compliance. That's a structural failure. A family that takes care of its people doesn't produce men who can be leveraged by outside threats because their family isn't taking care of them. She looked at Petra directly. "I am not my father. I am what happens after my father. I think those are different things, and I think this family needs the second one now, more than it needs another iteration of the first." The room held that for a long moment. Sorrentino looked at Carbone. Carbone was looking at Serafina with the expression he'd worn in the morning meeting, the one that hadn't fully resolved. It resolved now. He looked at Alessandro and said, "She'll do." And this time he said it to the room. The vote was unanimous. It took 4 minutes. Serafina sat at the head of the table and received it without expression, not because she didn't feel it, but because the room needed to see someone who could hold power without being visibly intoxicated by it. Alessandro, beside her, put his hand on her arm once, briefly, and said nothing. His hand was cold. She noticed that. She filed it without comment, the way she had filed everything in the past 72 hours that she wasn't ready to feel yet. After the council members left, shaking her hand, some of them, others giving the nod that meant the same thing in this world, she sat alone at the long table for 7 minutes. Luca waited at the far end of the room. He had the good judgment not to speak. She was thinking about her mother. Elena Vale in a hospital room in Lausanne, dying at 56 of a cardiac event that the doctors said was sudden, but that Serafina had always suspected was the cumulative result of carrying too much alone for too long. She was thinking about the apartment they'd sold piece by piece after, the dressmaker's shop, the 4 discarded drafts for the gown she'd worn to the Hargrove Grand, the gown that was now folded in a paper bag in the corner of a safe house bedroom because someone had brought her different clothes, and she hadn't thrown it away because she wasn't ready to yet. She was thinking about a 14-year-old letter from Damien Cross to a private investigator authorizing a search for a woman named Elena Vale. Her mother had been running, and the man who would one day marry her daughter had been running her down. She stood up. "Tomorrow," she said to Luca. 10 a.m., Federal Courthouse. "Everything is ready." She walked to where Alessandro was sitting in a chair against the wall. He had moved there after the vote, quietly, with the careful economy of a man managing a body that was sending urgent messages. She sat in the chair beside him, not across from him, beside him. "You should rest," she said. I've been resting for 70 years. His voice was slower than it had been. I'll rest when there's nothing left to watch. She looked at his profile, the white hair, the marked face, the hands in his lap with their deliberate composure. She thought about what it cost a man to watch his daughter from a distance for 32 years and say nothing, do nothing, hold the perimeter of a promise made to a woman who was now gone. She was right to leave, Serafina said, not an accusation, a fact being placed between them. Yes, Alessandro said, and you were right to let her. A long pause. I've told myself that for 32 years. Tonight is the first night I've believed it. She didn't respond to that. There was nothing to add. She sat with him in the empty room while Luca and the others moved quietly around the building doing the operational work of the aftermath. And for a few minutes, neither of them was the dawn or the air or any of the things the past 72 hours had required them to be. They were just two people sitting beside each other in a room that smelled like old wood and the residue of hard decisions, related by blood and separated by history, and finding, in the narrow window of time available to them, something that was not quite reconciliation, but was the honest thing that comes before it. The federal courthouse at 10 a.m. was everything a federal courthouse is: marble and procedure and the specific theater of institutions asserting their permanence. Serafina arrived with rice and 2 associates at 9:40. She wore charcoal, not black. She had slept 4 hours, which was becoming her operational baseline, and she had eaten breakfast, which Luca had insisted on, with the particular firmness of a man who had decided that keeping her functional was now part of his responsibilities. Judge Weir had not recused herself. Serafina had expected this possibility. Rice had expected it. The counter-motion was ready regardless. Damien Cross arrived at 9:55. She saw him across the courthouse lobby before either of them had to acknowledge the other. He was with 3 attorneys and a man she didn't recognize who carried himself like a federal liaison. He was wearing a suit that had been chosen with care. He looked controlled and purposeful, and exactly like what he had spent 14 years building himself to look like in this moment. He saw her. Their eyes met across the marble lobby. She held it for 3 seconds, without expression, then looked away first. Not because she was conceding anything, but because she had already decided that Damien Cross was not worth the energy of a staring contest. The hearing convened at 10:15. Judge Weir, 60-ish, silver-haired, with the expression of a woman who had heard arguments in every register and was allergic to theater, took her seat and allowed Damien's lead attorney, a man named Park, to present the injunction motion. Park was good. She had expected him to be good. He laid out the argument in clean structural terms. The succession framework constituted a documented criminal enterprise. The asset transfer it described was therefore subject to criminal forfeiture proceedings, and an immediate injunction was necessary to prevent the dissipation of assets pending investigation. He submitted the supporting documentation, including, Serafina noted, the altered prenatal records, which were still in the package even though Voss had warned her they were there, because Cross had decided to run the full play anyway. Then Rice stood up. He was not theatrical. He was 63 years old and had the manner of a man who found theater wasteful. He submitted the counter-motion documentation in 3 organized sections and walked the court through each one at the pace of someone who was not worried about time. The first section, forensic authentication of the prenatal records, including laboratory source file timestamps demonstrating that the version submitted by the petitioner's counsel had been modified 11 days ago, with the modification traced to a medical records access event using credentials belonging to Dr. Henley, Damien Cross's personal physician. The second section, the 14-year paper trail, the letter to Hollis, the private investigator, the Shell Corporation connections, the Scaletti and Brunau pattern analysis, Tesson's sworn statement taken by video deposition at 6 a.m. that morning from an undisclosed location, Ward's full cooperation agreement signed overnight. The third section was one document. Rice placed it on the submission table and said, "Your Honor, this is a communication from the petitioner, Damien Cross, to an associate dated 22 months ago. In it, the petitioner explicitly describes his strategic intent to use a personal relationship with the respondent as a mechanism for, quote, establishing legal access to the Moretti succession framework before public succession proceedings can be initiated. This communication was obtained through objection." Park was on his feet. The provenance of that document is documented in the attached chain of custody, Rice said without inflection. It was recovered from an encrypted server seized pursuant to a state warrant issued at 7 a.m. this morning in connection with a parallel state investigation into document fraud and financial crimes. Judge Weir was reading. The room was very quiet. She read for 4 minutes. Nobody spoke. Damien's legal team exchanged looks that were controlled but not controlled enough. Serafina watched Damien himself. He was looking at the document in the judge's hands with the expression of a man doing rapid arithmetic on outcomes, the specific focus of someone who has had contingency plans and is now determining which one still exists. Judge Weir set the document down. She looked at Park. Counsel, are you aware that your client had prior knowledge of the respondent's familial connections before initiating the personal relationship documented in these proceedings? Park said, Your Honor, the relevance of... I'm asking if you were aware. A pause. I was not, Your Honor. Then I suggest you take 30 minutes with your client before this proceeding continues, because the submissions before me indicate that what has been framed as a federal injunction request against a criminal enterprise may in fact be a component of the criminal enterprise. She looked over the bench with the expression of someone who has been in rooms like this for 30 years and has a precise understanding of when a proceeding has changed direction. We'll recess. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Serafina stood near a window that looked out onto the street and drank water from a bottle Luca's associate had handed her. Rice stood nearby, reviewing something on his phone with the untroubled focus of a man who had presented exactly what he intended to present and was now waiting for the math to complete. She felt it before she heard it. A shift in the air of the hallway, the specific pressure of someone approaching with intention. She turned. Damien Cross was walking toward her, alone. His attorneys were visible at the far end of the corridor, watching, but he had come without them, which was either very smart or a miscalculation, and she wasn't sure yet which. He stopped 6 feet from her. He looked at her with the face she had spent 4 years believing she understood. She looked back and understood that she had never seen it clearly. She had been looking at a performance so sustained it had become the man, or as close to the man as was visible. You found the Hollis letter, he said. Maya found it. In the atelier you had broken into. It was in the filing cabinet your people didn't open because it was behind the incorporation documents they were there to switch out. She paused. An interesting oversight. It was 14 years ago. His voice was even. I was 27. I was building something and I needed to understand the landscape. What you did afterward was marry me, she said. Not because of who I was, because of who my father was and what you wanted from that. You built 7 years of a relationship, 4 years of a marriage, and you contested the legitimacy of your own child Damien, as a legal mechanism. She held his gaze with the stillness she had spent 3 days learning was the most powerful thing available to her in any room. I want you to know that I'm not angry. I passed through angry somewhere around 2 in the morning and came out the other side. What I am is finished with you, not vengeful, not wounded, finished. She picked up the water bottle. Your attorneys are waiting. He stood there for 2 more seconds. She had expected, some part of her had expected, that there would be something there. Some residue of the man she had believed existed for 4 years. She looked for it and didn't find it, and the absence was its own kind of answer, cleaner than anything he could have said. He turned and walked back to his attorneys. She turned back to the window. Rice appeared at her elbow. He's going to take the plea, he said quietly. Park has been on the phone for the past 10 minutes. The state attorney's office called them before the recess. The server warrant this morning also pulled communications related to the Scaletti and Brunau operations. They're looking at federal wire fraud, document tampering, conspiracy charges. He paused. Park is a good lawyer. He'll tell his client to take what's offered before the federal prosecutors finish reading what's on those servers. And Vivian Hart? Her financial records are in the server pool too. She was deeper in the operation than she appeared. She managed the Shell Corporation structure, including Von Tu Capital. He paused. She's not going to be designing anyone's wardrobe for a while. Serafina looked out the window at the street below. Ordinary morning. People moving in the ordinary registers of their days, coffee cups, phones, the particular purposeful rush of a city that doesn't stop for anyone's crisis. The Atelier Incorporation documents, she said. The originals, the real ones. Already filed with the court as exhibits. The altered versions are documented as evidence of document fraud. Your pre-marriage IP is clean. He paused. Everything you built before him is yours. She nodded once. She stood with that for a moment, with the clean, spare fact of it. Everything she had built before him was hers. The stitches and the drafts and the 11 days and the 4 discarded attempts and the dressmaker's shop in the months after Lausanne. Hers. Court reconvened at 11:15. Parks stood and withdrew the injunction motion. The state attorney's office, represented by a woman named Cho, who had the efficient manner of someone who had been working since 5 a.m., submitted a notice of investigation and confirmed that Damien Cross had entered into a cooperation discussion with federal prosecutors. Judge Weir dismissed the motion. She said 2 additional sentences that Serafina would remember. The court notes that the documented conduct in this matter represents a sustained and premeditated effort to manipulate legal proceedings for personal financial gain. The court refers the relevant submissions to the Judicial Conduct Review Board for assessment of the circumstances surrounding this morning's hearing order. It was done in 11 minutes. Outside the courthouse, the November air hit cold and clarifying, the same cold that had hit her face on the steps of the Hargrove Grand 3 nights ago and felt like the beginning of something she hadn't yet named. Luca was waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Behind him, a car. She walked down and he fell into step beside her. Alessandro wants to see you, he said. He's at the building. How is he? A pause. He had a difficult morning. His doctor is there. She walked faster. The doctor, a quiet man named Bauer, who had the particular composure of physicians who deal primarily with terminal conditions, was in the hallway outside Alessandro's room when she arrived. He said what he needed to say in 3 sentences. 60 to 90 days had been the assessment 6 weeks ago. The assessment had revised. She went in. Alessandro was in a chair by the window, which was where she had expected to find him, because he was not a man who would receive bad news horizontal. He looked diminished in a way he hadn't 3 days ago, as if the counsel and the waiting and the compressed intensity of everything had used up reserves that had already been carefully managed. But his eyes were clear. They were always clear. You won, he said. The hearing was dismissed. Cross is cooperating with federal prosecutors. She sat in the chair across from him. It's not over. The legal proceedings will take months. But the injunction is gone and the succession council voted and the documentation is… Serafina. His voice was gentle in the specific way of a man who doesn't have the energy to be indirect. I know. Luca told me. He looked at her. I mean, you won. The thing that matters, not the hearing. She looked at him. Your mother left because she wanted you to have a life without this weight, he said. I have spent 32 years not knowing whether she was right. Tonight I know she was right, and I also know… He stopped, breathed, carefully. I also know that the weight found you anyway, and you carried it, and you are still standing, and the child is safe, and the family has a future. He looked at her with an expression that she didn't have a name for and suspected she hadn't needed a name for before now. She would have been proud of you. I need you to know that I know that. She sat with that, really sat with it, the way she hadn't allowed herself to sit with anything in 72 hours. I'm going to make mistakes, she said, running this. I'm going to get things wrong. Yes. And there will be people who don't accept it, who wait for me to fail. Yes. He paused. There were people who waited for me to fail for 20 years. Waiting is expensive. Most of them ran out of patience before I ran out of time. She almost smiled. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be true. He looked at her steadily. You know the difference. That's why you'll be all right. She reached out and put her hand over his on the armrest. His hand was cold, the same cold as the night before, and she didn't comment on it, and he didn't either. They sat in the window light, the November afternoon coming in gray and honest, making no promises.
and outside the city went on with its ordinary motion, indifferent as ever, which was what cities did and which was, in its way, a comfort. She stayed for 2 hours. They talked, and sometimes they didn't talk, and she learned more about her mother in those 2 hours than she had known in 32 years of believing she already knew everything. She learned that Elena Moretti had been the funniest person Alessandro had ever met, which surprised her. She learned that Elena had been afraid of dogs and had loved terrible crime novels, and had once negotiated a property dispute between two Moretti-aligned businesses by locking both parties in a room with a single bottle of good whiskey and refusing to open the door until they reached an agreement. "She would have been better at this than either of us," Alessandro said. "Probably," Serafina said. 6 weeks later, Alessandro Moretti died in the same chair by the window, in the early morning, with his doctor present and Caruso in the hallway, and Serafina holding his hand. He had been declining by degrees that were increasingly undisguised, and the morning it happened was not dramatic. It was quiet, the way things are quiet when they have been fully lived and have nothing left to prove.
He had been conscious the evening before and had asked Luca to bring him the succession documentation and had looked at his daughter's name on it for a long time and then asked Caruso to file it and gone to sleep. She sat with him for a while after. She didn't rush that. The world outside would begin its next chapter in an hour, and there would be things to handle and people to meet and decisions to make that would unfold across the next months and years, and she would handle them. She knew that. But for right now in this room, she sat with the man she had known for 6 weeks and had been the daughter of for 32 years, and she let the weight of that be what it was without trying to carry it into the next thing. Then she stood up. She put on her jacket. She went into the hallway where Luca was waiting and Caruso was standing with his hands at his sides and the look of a man who has just lost the person he organized his life around and is currently choosing, in real time, whether to rebuild or dissolve. She looked at Caruso directly. "Are you with me?" she said. He looked back at her. Something moved through his face that was grief and its resolution, happening simultaneously. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She looked at Luca. "Call the council. Not an emergency session. A scheduled one 2 weeks from now. I want it formal. I want everyone present." She paused. "And get me the contact for the new atelier space. It's time." She walked toward the stairs. Her back was better than it had been. The 3rd trimester was advancing, and her body had found a new arrangement with its own weight. Her son, she had known for 3 weeks now, a boy, confirmed in the unaltered prenatal record that Voss had sent to Rice, and that was now filed as authenticated evidence in federal proceedings. Her son moved in the familiar interior way that she still didn't have full language for. She stopped at the top of the stairs. Through the window at the end of the hallway, the city was coming up into morning light, the kind of gray-gold winter light that doesn't perform. It just shows up and illuminates what's there, indifferently, without flattery. Buildings, streets, water towers. The 10,000 ordinary vertical surfaces of a city that had been here before her and would be here after and didn't organize itself around her story any more than it organized itself around anyone else's. She looked at it for a moment, just looked. She was 32 years old. She had lost her marriage, her studio's independence, 4 years of assumed history, and the version of her origins she had believed entirely. She had found a father and lost him in 6 weeks. She had passed 3 trials and won a federal hearing and taken a seat at the head of a table that had been kept for her since before she knew it existed. She was carrying a child who would be born in 10 weeks into a world she was actively reshaping so that it would be worth arriving in. None of it was clean. None of it had been easy. There was no version of what had happened in the past 2 months that came out without cost. To her, to people who had been caught in the machinery, to the ones who had made wrong choices, and the ones who had made right ones, and the ones who had done both at different moments of the same night. The world she was inheriting was not a good world made better. It was a complicated world made more honest, which was the most she had ever thought it was reasonable to ask of any world. She thought about her mother one more time. Elena Vale in the dressmaker's shop. Elena Vale locking 2 men in a room with a bottle of whiskey. Elena Vale in a hospital in Lausanne, leaving her daughter the stubbornness and the eyes and the unspoken instruction that survives through the body rather than words. You get up. Whatever happened, whatever was taken or lost or proven false or broken beyond honest repair, you get up and you face what's in front of you, and you build what needs to be built from whatever is left in your hands. Serafina Vale, Serafina Moretti, the new godmother of the oldest criminal empire in America, 32 years old and 10 weeks from delivering the next blood heir of the family that had been waiting for her since before she was born, took her hand off the windowsill. She went down the stairs. She walked out into the morning,